All right, hello everyone. Gabriel Clevenger here, pastor at the table. It's good to have this available for you here. So, last week we finished up our series concerning how we often see Jesus at tables with people, specifically in the Gospel of Luke. It was a few weeks called At Table with Jesus, and if you haven't caught those or you missed one, you can find those on our social media pages. I encourage you to make sure that you saw all of those, but I would say that, wouldn't I, right? So we have a few weeks left of this church year before we celebrate the beginning of the next church year with turning our hearts, spirits, and minds toward preparing ourselves to receive God's presence with us. This is called the season of Advent. On your calendars on your refrigerators, probably, it will begin with the Sunday after the American holiday of Thanksgiving. This year it will be on Sunday, November 29th, that we will begin that new church year. Now, I'll do another video probably on how this works and why we don't just start the church year on January 1 like all the folks around us. And I'll also get a little into the notion of how commemoration, celebration, and marking time all say something about what we already believe and nudge us toward believing and valuing certain things. But I'll say more about that later. For today, our texts from the Christian calendar are noted in the description below here. The one that we will be addressing today is the psalm for today, and that's Psalm 1. So take a moment here. You can pause this and go to read the scriptures. If you don't read them all, it's okay, but I recommend you read Psalm 1. It's only 6 verses, but it's really thick. I'll see you back here in a minute. Okay, welcome back. Now, I don't know whether you listen to the same radio stations that I do, but there have been quite a few mentions recently about this being the 20-year anniversary of the release of Linkin Park's album Hybrid Theory. It was released in late October of 2000. If you've never heard of it, that's okay, but if you have heard of it, you likely have an opinion. There have been other shifts in popular genres and some that have probably been bigger, but that album was 12 times platinum in sales here in the United States, sold 27 million albums worldwide, won at least one Grammy, hit the top 10 in 15 other countries outside the US, and remains the top-selling album in the rock genre to this point in this century. I'm not here to talk about whether the album is good, but I do want to use this as a way to talk about how some songs or artists convey a kind of a feel for the time. Linkin Park's album here was that kind of album. It's rife with frustration, loneliness, despair, and outcry for someone to listen and or to care. I mean, the emotion of the songwriting evokes certain feelings that a lot of people seemed to share or could at least understand because of how many copies it sold in various markets and countries. And the music matched the lyrics. Again, I'm not telling you to go out and buy it, but to a certain extent, if you were a teenager in the early 2000s or maybe a little older, chances are that Linkin Park provided some of the soundtrack of your memories. There are other songs or artists that could have been similar. I mean, if you're old enough to remember Gene Autry or Perry Como or Elvis Presley. Or think about how well the late 60s and early 70s were reflected by Edwin Starr's 1970 release, War, right? You know, war, good God, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. That sounds like that period of time. It sounds like it. But at the same time, somehow, both the Carpenters and Rick James sound like the 70s too. I mean, we could say the same thing about the 80s and the 90s. I mean, you know, people have been talking a lot about 80s iconic band Van Halen with the death of Eddie Van Halen a few weeks ago. I mean, the shifting culture and perception of youth that emerged with the rise of the band Nirvana in the 80s and 90s was something too. This is all to say nothing of the rise as well of rap in the 80s and 90s. That's a whole nother story as well. The artists and the songs that get popular because people really like them say something about us as a people. It says something about how we live life, what we worry about, in what and where we find value, and what we think, or maybe better, how we feel. So in that way, it's a diagnostic, or it's reflective of what's already there. And the music that gets popular says something on a grand scale about the world in which it arises. Some of the songs that get popular, and for instance, to which now TikTok videos are made, are truly frightening, or depressing, or both. But songs are also prescriptive. They don't just show what's there already. I won't go into this too much here, but while there's a way that art imitates or reflects life on the one hand, it's also true that often when people see something portrayed in art, music specifically, it suddenly becomes a more viable option for them in their own lives, even if they had never contemplated or struggled with that issue before. I say all this about music and real life to get us to some sort of background by which we can begin reading the Psalms better. Popular songs will be popular or sell well for a while, but when the mood or the setting changes, then the popularity of those songs will change also. So, if I begin calling out the names of the top songs for the weeks of 1985, Su Su Studio by Phil Collins, or something by Tears for Fears or Wham, you would likely remember that song if you're old enough. But that's almost certainly to be followed by your saying, I haven't heard that song in forever. That's because that song kind of belongs to that time. It's the way it works now. The language, the feel, the emotion, the idea kind of belongs to that time. And if you were to put that song on in your car or your house, or a song that you liked from when you were a lot younger, chances are you would be taken to another place at another time in your mind or in your feelings. You would feel different while listening to that song. Now, contrast that to these Psalms that we find here in the Bible. Some of these are upwards of 3,000 years old, but they have been the songbook of the people of God for all that time. Because they reflect what we will go through, how we will feel, think, and see life at different times in our lives. But just like music today, they're not only diagnostic, they're also prescriptive. Rather than just saying sometimes life is like this, these Psalms actually prepare and condition us for how to respond when certain things happen that are common to the experience of people living in service to God. It might be a little difficult to see it at first, but these songs have endured literally thousands of years because of how powerful they are and how applicable they actually are to life. The people of God have held the Psalms in high regard for all this time, returning to pieces of this very long album every day. My own practice, and one that I recommend to people, is to have a plan of reading the Scriptures that leads you to work through both the Old and the New Testaments, but also leads you through the Psalms a little bit every day. These Psalms address the personal issues, both pains and problems, and heights and celebrations that we will experience in the course of a life following Jesus. We need to find here a record of people going through the same things I'm going through today. And it also prepares me for those things that I may not have experienced quite yet. So that is the point of going through the Psalms regularly, and I highly recommend it. And what we have today is the first song of the album, as it were. Psalm 1 is an illustration of the kind of life one would experience when he or she chooses the path of service to God, rather than serving anything else. It begins with happy are those, or happy is the one, or blessed is the one. This is giving us a recommendation. It's telling us something that is true of people who do these things. But in doing that, this psalm is also giving us advice. It's giving us a prescription. So the first part doesn't sound so hard, right? I mean, we should all want to disregard the advice of the wicked and stay away from the path of the sinners, right? The next verse likely needs a little unpacking. Verse 2 has us consider that the delight, the pleasure of the one who follows God's way well is in the law, the way of doing things that God lays out. Then there's this talk of meditating on it day and night. Now, to our ears, this sounds unreasonable. If that's literally all we think about, then how will we be able to do anything that's prosperous, like verse 3 is going to tell us will happen? I mean, how will we actually dedicate ourselves well to anything that requires concentration? This is a poetic way of saying that the ways of God should be our base of decision making. It should shape the things we think and desire. But how do we get there? We start looking around for some sort of user's manual, right? Well, the point of this is not that you constantly go around chanting scripture in Latin all the time, or even in English. What this is talking about is being pointed in the right direction, toward the way God lays out for us to do things, so that we limit our options to acceptable and good things. This is talking about taking the right things for granted. Pointing the right direction at the very beginning rules out quite a number of bad possibilities. I talk about this in other places too, but let's just let it suffice here to say that homing in on framing your life around God's way doesn't happen by accident, but it does serve to make good things come more naturally. I've had 2 conversations just this week with people I've been meeting with regularly for whom this has been proven to be true. If you want to know more about it, if you want to talk with me about pursuing this in your own life, please contact me. We'll get you started. It really is true. Then the person who does these things is compared to a beautiful, prosperous, strong scene. I mean, this is desirable. This picture kind of just leaps off the pages at you. A tree planted by springs of water. Everything happens when it's supposed to. Fruit comes about at the right time, and the life of the tree is not in danger because the leaves don't wither. That's evident. This tree is all set. This is quite a desirable image, especially as a metaphor for life. How would you like to be one for whom things happen at just the appropriate times? This tree will experience seasons, as do all, and so will the one depending on God's leading, but the life and the productiveness of this tree is not in doubt. That sounds great. For your life to progress through the appropriate things at the appropriate times. For the signs of vitality in your life never to wither. That kind of life is what we all desire. For the base to be secure, for the source of nourishment to be close and steady. But then the song returns to talking about the wicked. Life is not going to be that way for them. The winds of judgment will knock them down or blow them away. What can be pointed out here for us is that this psalm is not really about one big decision. This is talking about a way of life, both following God and the path of the wicked, the scoffers, those early up in the psalm that it talks about. That is a way of life. Those are decisions, not one big decision. A life is a million or more very small decisions, all of them being in light of some understanding of what the end is. This psalm has us look at what is the end, the point of the one whose life is actually happy or blessed. The assumption, the underlying foundation, the point is the law of God, the way God offers us to live our lives. Verse 6 tells us that the one who does that, who chooses the way of the righteous with those individual steps, will have God watching over the way. And that life will not end in destruction. Now, here you may be saying, well, I'd love for that to be my song, but I don't know how to get there. Or maybe you've been doing what people have been telling you to do, but your life still sounds like a really sad country song. Living a life that is focused on the way God has you to do things is way more about one small step after the other with God's help, and you won't be able to do it without God's help, than it is about big leaps. If that's what you want, I want for you to contact me here. I want for the lyrics to this song to remind you of your life. I want for this song to be true of you in all the right ways. These psalms are the songbook of the church, the soundtrack for lives of the people of God. So it is good and right for you to want your life to look like Psalm 1. You have to decide for yourself to do it, but you can't do it all by yourself. The life of a follower of Jesus doesn't make sense alone. So you will need help from others, and others will need help from you. That is the way God does things. We want for you to be like a tree planted beside the water, everything happening at the right times. You can find out how natural it is to live life this way, but again, it doesn't happen by accident. You'll need to choose the right way to live your life. I would love to know how we can pray for you best, or to sit down and talk with you about what it looks like to do this, to choose the path that leads to all these good things. We don't want anything from you. We just want these things here in Psalm 1 for you. I hope to get a chance to talk with you about it soon. Now I'll bless you as we finish today. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.